Absolutely.
Keep it up here, maybe.
Absolutely. You have all that great knowledge and great actually. Since Marketplace are a real recognition.
See, Marketplace 3 sounds like a deli, something unique.
You know, we think it's a building name right now. He asked us how we were doing Marketplace.
Oh, really? Yeah. Because I've worked with a lot of CISOs and everything. I understand it goes in that, those hearings, you know. It's hard. Yeah.
Our sister's at sick now, probably because of that. So.
I know, it's stress.
Yeah, it hasn't stopped. I think some of the initial stuff has died down, but I think behind the scenes,
Oh. And then Hartley just compounds. I'm sure you're. Okay.
And then you kick it off.
Okay, I'm waiting on Kim. So whenever we're ready, where is she? We can't start with. Is Kim ready to go? Hello. How are you?
They sent me, I couldn't do anything about it. I'm not that kind of guy.
You're not that kind of guy?
No, I don't do well paying stuff like that, IDs and all that kind of crap.
Terrace, I want to introduce you.
They pretty
Good
much-
morning. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Ron Ross, the FISMA creator. Oh. Right. Oh my.
thanks for inviting me out this morning.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for coming out.
It's great, because I've lived in Columbus. I've never been here.
Oh, really?
Right in my neighborhood.
2 minutes? Okay, 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Just gonna- Yes, it is.
Great, because then I can listen to what you have to say at my leisure, even though I don't get any of that. Yeah, that'd be good.
Terrace, actually, police fire James. This is the deputy. So that's he reports directly every day. So he was asking us a very good question when he got in this morning was, as far as the creation of the ARS
Yeah.
and the policies and procedures, how does it impact really the people that have to implement all of those that we're sitting in
Well,
writing? I said that's a great question.
Well, you know, I was just talking to two of my folks from clinical quality.
From where?
Clinical quality, our business. Because the key part of what we're doing with this program, and this one of the things I do, is dealing with those who are part of the rest of our enterprise internally. Then there's those, of course, extra, which is the company has some things in here. But I've heard an awful lot listening to requirements from those external businesses who really want to do it.
Okay, what about this screen? I need this on for the speakers. I don't know where the power button is. Ask him where the power button is on this one.
Right.
Those things are great.
Speakers in case they want it. There's 2 extra
Oh, good,
there.
good.
So folks have that.
Okay. And your last name is pronounced
Bodewin.
Bodewin? Bodewin.
You can say it any way you want. We're in Baltimore.
Bodewin. I wasn't sure if you had a specific power button for that or not.
No, normally this comes on.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Just tell everybody they have to take a seat, and we're starting now. So they,
Okay.
they need to take a seat.
Okay. All right. You good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Is everybody in from the lobby? Is everybody in from the lobby? Okay.
It is.
All right.
Absolutely.
Okay, good morning. We're going to go ahead and get things started. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Spring CISO Forum. Yay! I know security is exciting, right? Yay! Talk to me. There you go. Thank you. Okay, so very quickly, we had to stay on schedule. As you see in the itinerary, we do have a Dr. Diana Burley that is scheduled today. However, she is in traffic, so she's going to be running a little late. So we may have to change the flow today a little bit. But first of all, I'd like to introduce to you Terrace King, who is the Deputy CIO, and he's another one that's glad to be here. Tara? Thank you.
Sure. Good morning. How are you on this rainy Tuesday morning? I am very impressed so far. This is the first chance that I've had, James, to visit a CISO forum, and just wasn't expecting the kind of structure outside with the booth set up and just the participation from across CMS and externally as well. One of the things that I want to roll through today, I believe we have a PowerPoint. Is it headed up? Already teed? If not, trust me, I can wing it. I'm a wing it kind of guy. One of the things we wanted to talk about this morning is just a perspective from the front office of OIS. And this is not only from my perspective, but also from our CIO, Dave Nelson. I see Janet Vogel coming in as well. And those of you who don't know Janet, raise your hand, Janet, so they can see my boss over there. Give her a round of applause for my benefit, will you? Thank you very much. From our enterprise perspective, just to give you a view of how we see security from that vantage point. When I first came on board, one of the first things that my predecessor did for me wisely was to hand me a significantly sized paperweight. And on that paperweight, it said a couple things. It said, think security. Think security. He had given me months in terms of transition. But one of the last things he wanted to leave with me was this issue of think security. And you know, often as we have conversations, it's the last thing said to a person that leaves the most indelible print in their mind in terms of priority. And he wanted to say that to me, not just because in his mind security may be greater in importance than the other things we did. Certainly designing systems in OIS and working with our business partners in terms of refining and defining requirements is important. Certainly housing data is important. All of that is extremely important. But he left that with me as a charge because he knows that too often in the hurried pace of what we do, we don't think about security. That often it's an afterthought. That quite often security is one of those processes that we only think about when there's a problem. And he wanted to leave that with me in terms of emphasis because he wanted me to be able to transfer that information to the group directors and have it forefront in my mind so that as we build whatever we build in OIS and across the agency, that we are thinking about security at the time we build it, and yes, even before. That this component, that you, the ISOs across the agency, are not just an afterthought after it's up, but when the concept is developed, you are a part of that process. He also said that to me, quite frankly, because he knew I came out of one of the business components within CMS. And I was really fortunate this morning to see a few of the folks from the 6.5 years that I proudly spent in clinical quality. And we put up some great systems. And just like within OIS, we often had to do that within tremendously challenging timeframes. And let's just be honest about it. When you're pushed towards a time frame and getting things right, the first thing on your mind is not always, is this a secure system? But your first charge often, too often, is to get it done. But someone in the room has to be thinking about security, because without that, there's rework and time spent and certain security issues that will occur that will cause you problems later on. And so I really appreciated that last touch point from my predecessor. So I leave you as that charge today, and it's one that I walk with, and I know it's one that Janet and Dave have for the entire OIS staff and for those abroad. Now, one of the things that we were going to talk about in the PowerPoint was the issue of the enterprise and what this group does, and our perspective from the front office of what EISG does. And let me just say something for those of you who are a part of. Well, you got slides for me now? Too late. Thank you. Though it'll be more dangerous with me off script, this is the way I like it, trust me. We had listed the fact that we wanted to give a perspective of what EISG does. And as a part of that is the word enterprise. That's what's listed on that first slide, the issue of enterprise. And let me say once again to those of you that are outside of CMS, to give this some perspective. This was shocking to me when I first came. Really hadn't seen a process operate this way from Social Security Administration after 25 years there, that to a great extent what we have here is a decentralized systems process. I was really surprised to see, in terms of end-stage renal disease, some of the enrollment information really happening in clinical quality. That in the heart of program information you had in other places other than systems, other than the central, what I thought in my mind, a central component had. Now, what that adds, this kind of decentralized process, as you know, are significant challenges left to us collectively as it relates to managing our security process. Because it means that the responsibility is not that of OIS alone, but it's the responsibility of the entire collective as to how we will manage the integration of our security processes, the responsibilities within our security processes within OIS, led by that front office, but also in connection with our senior level partners across the agency, and what I see as the ground level, the ISOs across CMS. Are there any ISOs in here today? I just want to know. Don't be ashamed. Raise your hand. This is something that I'm going to ask right now that I know is never done. Give a round of applause to our ISOs. How about that? So thinking security, thinking enterprise, thinking integration is extremely important, and that's a list of what we put there. Now let me give you some scope of what we do, because I want to make sure we're all on an equal kind of playing field as it relates to CMS. Just broad scope, and that was listed on our slide 3. 10,000 employees, sensitive information. And we're talking about the sensitivity. 100 million Americans with CMS information. And then we just think about this in terms of Medicare and Medicaid, our programs prior to the past couple years. And now we've added that third M of marketplace, which challenges us from a systems perspective in a totally different way, because now it's about our being connected, the interconnectedness with other systems. CMS with IRS, CMS with state exchanges, CMS, of course, with our partners down the street at Social Security Administration. Now we have another set of challenges. It's not just ownership of CMS data and protecting that data, but other agencies are looking at their information in a similar way. And we have to work collectively and together to ensure that our information on the federal and state level is protected and that the American public has some sense of security around that. Now, just speaking about the, kind of elephant in the room, if you will, and if we're going to give applause, I really do feel that this past year, though it has been an extremely challenging one, it has been one that has required the leadership within OIS and within EISG to keep its eyes squarely placed on the importance of security. And I have to say, in her absence, I think Teresa Fryer has done a tremendous job in terms of keeping her eye on the security priorities of this agency. Come on, I know it's a rainy day, but in her absence, we can. So Teresa isn't here today, but I want to be able to, James, to play this back to her when she is here, so she can see even the ISOs applauded her in this room and the entire enterprise, because she has done a great job, $900 billion, as you know, and just contracts, once again, across the continuum. Really quick, want to go through this information in terms of the kind of things we focus on and the kind of things we defend in terms of our security program. Consistent policy, here's the litany. Policy, process, security of all of our production systems, and ensuring that authorities to operate are there. Want to say on behalf of James and Janet, one of the issues that we have focused on and will work with you on is bringing down that number of ATOs that we do not have, where ATOs are non-existent. That margin is an area of concentration for us. The report cards, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, the coordination that goes on across the enterprise within CMS. Lastly, I want to touch on a couple other things in terms of top priorities. On the last page, on the 5th page of the presentation, as it talked about view from the front office, it talks about top priorities for us, and the federal government, cybersecurity being one of our top priorities, and our holistic approach and metrics. Let me just leave you with some collective challenges that I think we as a security community have together. One of those, from my standpoint, is retaining talent in this arena. Retaining talent within the security arena. It is difficult. As you know, the pay scale externally for those who have tremendous talent within the security arena, we just can't match it. But one of the things that happens in the federal government, there are several of us, including myself, who work within the federal government because of the cause of mission, and want to be a part of a great opportunity to lock into a centralized mission for the American public, which is calling, if you will, and who view this as a great place in terms of foundational development in their career. And so this is one of the areas, James, along with our ISOs and business partners, and in working with OOM, in building the necessary bridges and opportunities and ways to hold on and retain, to ensure they're working in an environment not only where they're comfortable, but challenged to really focus on the kind of things that brings them a sense of achievement. That is one of our major challenges. Number two, this whole issue of integration. And EISG working with you, our partners, and then gleaning information, like the information that will come to us today around FISMA and other challenges and guidelines that we have. That integration and partnership is also extremely important, in a piece that I'm confident with Teresa and James's leadership that we will continue to forge those partnerships. And then lastly, one that I mentioned earlier, this whole issue around ATOs. It's not just documentation, but make sure that there's a process in place wherever there are vulnerabilities in terms of our systems and mitigation strategies in place to deal with those as well. So this has been a great opportunity for me to have a chance to go off script. I always enjoy the opportunity to talk not just to and before the folks in security, but I particularly enjoy the partnership that I have an opportunity to have with the folks in EISG, with James and Teresa and the entire staff. And so for joining us here this morning, we do thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you very much.
All right. I think technically they're going to show a video here shortly, since the schedule has changed up a little bit. It's going to be with Ellen DeGeneres. Now, I did not announce that she was going to be here today because I figured that the seats would have been packed, so maybe I should have. What do you think? Okay, so let's get that queued up, please.
Through the channels, and I saw this. I really love infomercials. I don't know if you love them as much as I do, but I found one. It's a new product that I want to share with you. And, you know, if you have a hard time remembering your online passwords, a lot of people have a lot of different passwords. This is going to solve your problems.
Online passwords. There's just too many. And who can remember all those tricky combinations? So you stick them on your monitor or you hide them in a drawer. But not anymore. Introducing Password Minder, the personal logbook that takes the hassle out of passwords. Forget about sticky notes or scraps of paper, because Password Minder has been specifically designed to organize and safely store passwords. You'll find them in an instant and never lose a password again, guaranteed. Need to make a password? Just add it to your Password Minder. The alphabetical listing organizes all your usernames and passwords for instant recall and easy reference.
I don't have to worry anymore about security or identity theft. I now have all my passwords in one place. It's great.
If you have passwords, you need Password Minder.
So call now and get your very own Password Minder book for just $10.
That's real. That's real. Wait.
There we go. Thank you.
For half the price, you could write all your passwords on a $5 bill. This is insane. Does this seem safe to keep all your passwords in one place? In a place that's labeled Internet Password Minder? I don't think they thought this through fully. I mean, what if someone gets their hands on your Password Minder? So I came up with this. It is Ellen's Internet Password Minder Protector, and what you do, you put it in here, you close it, and then it has a built-in combination lock right there, you see on the side, and I know you're thinking, Ellen, what if I forget my combination? Well, if you order now, I will include this. You can put it in there. It's the Password Minder Protector Minder. It's the one place to keep your Password Minder Protector combination. And I have one more special offer. If you don't feel like writing down your passwords, send them to me. And for $10, I'll write them down for you. Don't worry about sending me your credit card information. I'll figure it out. Oh, my God. Can you believe that? Crazy. It's just a phone book. That's what it is. If you see an infomercial you think I should see, send it to me. I love these things. We'll be right back after this.
Was that not great? She hit the nail on the head with that one. So basically, Dr. Burley is here. Her name is Dr. Diana Burley, and she's going to be speaking today in reference to Facebook, children online. This is geared towards more the home environment. Thank you. Okay, all right, the rain apparently has affected everyone. Before I move forward with the presentations, Karen, could you do me a favor? Could you stand up? Karen is our timekeeper today, and so those for our speakers, keep an eye on Karen there. She's on the corner. She's going to keep us straight today. But I also wanted to throw a shout out to some contractors. We have, I know that Taris has pointed out some numbers and shared with you some of those things that we're working on as far as initiatives with the ATOs. However, we do have a lot of contractors that support EISG. I know that some of you are in the crowd today, so thank you so much for all your support this year. Thank you for the backup and everything that you do for us here at CMS. So I just wanted to say thanks. Right now, I'd like to introduce Diana Burley. Thank you, Diana.
Sure. Thank you. Good morning. I apologize for being late. I actually left Northern Virginia at 6:25. Yes, I know it's raining and whatever. Slides? Do we have them up?
They're coming.
They're coming. All right. So while they're coming, let me just say I am very pleased to be here with you this morning. I am Diana Burley. I'm a professor at George Washington University, and most of my work actually focuses on building the cybersecurity workforce, on recruitment and retention and education issues. So I was very, very delighted to hear the speaker talk about this issue of retention as being a very significant issue, because that is something that I spend a lot of time focusing on and trying to get people remaining in the federal workforce. But today what I'd like to talk to you about are your kids. And thinking about this, I know from my personal experience, I have 2 young teenagers, and so this is something that I worry about all of the time. And for those of you in the audience who have kids or nieces or nephews or even neighbor kids, it's something that I hope that you worry about, and I hope that the talk today will give you some sense of not just what to do, but why they are doing what they're doing, and some strategies for how you might help them navigate through this online environment that they are so vested in. Do I, for slide progression? Oh, all right, there we go. So we're going to talk specifically about 3 things. We're having just a little bit of trouble this morning. Well, you don't need to see this slide anyway. This is just the agenda slide, so I'm going to talk through it. We're going to talk about 3 things: how and why and what our children are doing online, some specific risks to them as they peruse the online environment and social networking environment, and then some resources that will help them navigate their way through. First, this slide really gives you some statistics, and I wasn't going to read them, but I will now. The first thing that I want to draw your attention to is the fact that we do call our youth digital natives, right? And I'm sure that you've all heard that term, but I want to make sure that you really have a good understanding of why we call them digital natives. If you think about people, maybe you are bilingual, or you think about people who are born into bilingual households where they're speaking English and Spanish from birth. That is a very different reality from those of us who learned Spanish in the 7th grade, or the 10th grade or college. And it's not just because they have a better feel for the language, it's because there's something inherent in the way that they understand language and communication. The same thing applies to the term digital native. It's not that, and I consider myself to be fairly technically adept, but my understanding of how my children interface with their online environments is very different because it is something that they are born into, that they have been born into, that they're growing up in. So it's not surprising when we look at statistics that say 96% of our children are online today. They spend, and by they I mean kids aged 8 to 18, spend nearly 8 hours a day online. 8 hours. And that number is only going to increase because I don't know about you and your school district, but I live in Fairfax County, and one of the big things that they're pushing toward are online textbooks. Right, where the kids now, it's not, you can't even know that at least while they're in school they won't be online because the teachers are sending them online because they don't have physical materials, they have digital materials. And while the teachers may say, now I only want you to go to Blackboard and I only want you to look at the site with the materials for the course, how many kids do you think really do that? None. Right? So that number is just going to continue to increase. 74% of our teens are using the internet on their mobile devices. That number is going to continue to rise. And it used to be, we're just not having a good day. I can go with it, I can go without it, it really makes no difference. Let's see how much you pay attention to me as the technology continues to move, and then we'll see how good I really am, right? It's not just that they're using Facebook, because that used to be where all of the kids go, but now they're increasingly using Twitter, they're tweeting everything that they do, and they're using Instagram and Tagged and Flickr and all of these different sites, so they have multiple online identities. What are they sharing? Well, they're pretty much sharing everything. I know several years ago we used to really focus on, no, don't share your picture, or don't say your real name, or don't tell your school. Well, that's gone out the window. 91% of our teens are sharing photos or videos of themselves. 53% of our teens have posted their actual email addresses. Their cell phone numbers, 20% of them have posted. They are giving, you can see the list of statistics on the side, 92% of them are using their real names. Okay? And part of this is because they are communicating with their real friends. So it doesn't make any sense for me to say my name is Lisa when I'm connecting with all of the people who know that I'm Diana. So I just use my real name. Okay? So they are sharing more and more and more. And you can see just in looking at statistics from 2006 to 2012 that the numbers of individual items that they're sharing continues to rise. And if we looked at percentages for 2013, and I'm sure once we have the numbers and the data for 2014, these trends will continue to grow. So we know they're online, and we know that they're online in a significant way. The question is why? What is motivating this sharing behavior? Well, the first reason that I want to point out to you is something that is very different for them than it is for us. Because as adults, we tend to go online and use social media in a way that allows us to segment ourselves. We have our Facebook friends. We might even have a couple of Facebook accounts because we really don't want our work people to see the pictures from the party over the summer that we were at, right? We have our LinkedIn account. We have all of these different accounts, and we connect to different people on these different accounts. We use it as a disintegration space. But it is exactly the opposite for our youth. they use social media as an integration space. It is a way for them to connect their school friends with their activity friends, with their home friends, with their cousins and their families, with the people who they don't even know, but they connected through some other site, and they pull all of these individuals together. Okay? The other piece of it is that youth are going through a process of identity development. This is when they're figuring out who they are. And part of what social media allows them to do is to change pieces of who they are. I can remember when my daughter was young, and by young, I mean because she's 14 now, so I mean young like 8, 10, she would go on to some of the kids' sites. One was called Club Penguin, and she would become a penguin, and she had one penguin identity that was a girl, and she had one penguin identity that was a boy, because she wanted to see what it would be like to be a boy. And what you'll find is that this was not unusual. Lots of the kids do this. They use the social media to change static elements of their behavior that they otherwise couldn't do. Other reasons why they're sharing more, they have more opportunities. As you saw the other slide where there are many different sites that they're using now. They all have smartphones now, whereas they used to have no phone or a flip phone, but now everybody has an iPhone or an Android phone. So they have more opportunities to share. And the norms for sharing behavior continuously evolve. How many of you have been at a meal with your child and they have said before they cut into their food, wait a minute, let me take a picture of it? Anybody seen that? I have. It drives me crazy, because why? Who wants to see what does it make any sense? It makes no sense at all. But they do, and sometimes it's not even good food. It's like, really? It's a hamburger. But this is part of what they do. I don't have to understand it, I just note it. Okay? This is part of what they do. Or let me take a selfie. Right? Everywhere they are, they want to take a picture alone, by themselves, with their hair down, with their hair up, with the blue shirt on or white, just constant. So the norms surrounding what they're doing online are pushing them to share more. But they also believe that they have a sense of control because they do actively manage their networks. They actively manage the number of people, the type of people, the specific people that they're interfacing with. Other reasons why they're sharing more is that the technology is enabling them to do so. Have any of you heard of the app Snapchat? A few? So Snapchat is an app that allows you to send a picture to a friend that will self-destruct in 5 seconds. So it allows you to share what you want and have this sense of security that I can control this information, I can control who gets it, I can control how long they see it. And the technology is encouraging the norms for sharing everything, everywhere, all the time. Now, technology is not the only reason that they feel like they're in control, because we also have to understand that the definitions that they are using for the different individuals that they connect with are very different than definitions that we use. To us, a friend is somebody that we have some emotional connection to, that we share something, some significant experience or history with. That's not the same in the digital space. A friend is simply somebody that you're connected to through social media in the digital space, and you may know them or you may not know them in real life. Okay? We think 100 people is way more friends. I mean, because we're thinking about friends in terms of people that you're actively engaged with, actively maintaining a relationship with. How could you possibly do that with 100 people? Well, if you're defining friend differently, 100 people is not that big of a deal. And in fact, the average teen, 12 to 17, has more than 450 friends on Facebook and more than 171 followers on Twitter. Now, I have a Twitter account, and I rarely have time to tweet anything, and I looked at my followers, and I have like 50. My daughter has a Twitter account. She doesn't use a real name, thank goodness, but she has 252 followers. And I'm thinking, what do you have to say that 252 people want to hear? Because maybe I should hire her to be my social media manager. But they're looking at this and they're involved in participating in the social media space in a very different way. And this issue of control, again, they police themselves. They know, while I may think 450 is too many, they think 450 is fine, but they know that maybe 650 is too many. So they have their own norms about the right number and the right level of participation. And they won't hesitate. If somebody is causing them a problem or they simply don't like them anymore, they won't hesitate to unfriend, unfollow, untag, which means take your name off the picture from the party from last summer, or delete people. They are very much in control of their networks. Now, against that backdrop, if we think about some of the risks, we begin to see a different dynamic, something different than how we might deal with social media and participation in social media space. And the first one is this notion of privacy. And I've put privacy on the risks page intentionally because they think about privacy in a very different way than we do. And when we think about risk, we often think about privacy. Okay? So one thing that we have to keep in mind is that privacy is a balancing act, and it's even a balancing act for us, right? We want to get the discount at the grocery store, but we're not sure we want Giant tracking everything that we purchase. It's a balancing act. Well, it's a balancing act for our youth in their social media spaces as well. How can I effectively, as a teenager, how can I effectively belong to a group if I make so much of what I'm doing private and I don't share with them? Then I'm not following the group norms. So I have to navigate and figure out how much do I share, but not just how much do I share, why do I need to keep it private? Difference does it make? They really don't have the same sensitivity to keeping information to themselves as we do. So when we talk to our children about privacy and we give them all of the, well, you want to make sure that you keep your information private. I don't even know that we go into why. We just say you want to keep your information private. Their first question is, why? If I keep it private, my friends, and remember, we're not talking about the friends that we think of as friends. We're talking about the 450 friends that include people they know and people that they don't. If I keep it private, my friends won't be able to see what I ate at dinner last night. Now, in my mind, why would they care? But in their mind, that's very important because it's a social norm and it's something that they have to do in order to maintain participation in the group. So it's not good enough for us to simply say, well, you don't want to share everything about your life. Doesn't matter. They're going to share it anyway. What we have to do is to help them manage their reputations in terms of when to delete people, when to unfriend people, when to untag themselves, to help them consider the future, but to recognize always that it's a constant balancing act for participation in the group versus what do I need to keep to myself. And the norms, even outside of social media, when we look at things like reality TV. Now, 25 years ago, how many of us would have thought that the most popular shows on television would be shows following around people in their homes, in their cars, walking down the street, sharing their lives that used to be, quote, private, and frankly, quite boring. But the world has changed, and that is reflected in the way that our children participate in social media. Predators don't wear signs online to say, I'm a cyber stalker, I'm a cyber predator, don't talk to me. In fact, they do just the opposite. They look very engaging, very safe, very comfortable. They put on the persona of someone that you would want to talk to, someone that your parents would approve of you talking to. And we've all heard about the risk behind private chats, and probably if any of these have been discussed with our children, it's don't go into a private chat room, don't have a private conversation with anyone, right? Perhaps even turning off the GPS tracking so that you can't get tagged on the photos and where you are. But how many people, and you don't have to raise your hands, but how many of you have either done it or thought about doing it in terms of taking a video, a YouTube video of your cute thing that your cute kid has done and posting it online? And even if you haven't done it, how many of those have we seen? They're so popular that the Today Show and then the news programs pick them up. Has anybody even stopped to consider the dangers behind that? Behind putting a video of your child online so that the world can see your kid, the world can see the inside of your minivan, the world can see landmarks that are going past you as you drive down the road. And you think everybody is looking at the cute behavior of your kid, but a cyber predator is looking at all those other pieces of information so that they can make themselves comfortable, so that when they walk up to your kid in the grocery store, they can say, you know what, Amanda, and go on down the road. And the kid thinks, well, I must know you. You must know my parents. So the same things that we tell our kids and used to talk to our kids about in terms of face-to-face happens online. And what we have to be aware of is that not only do we have a responsibility to help keep our kids safe by teaching them, we also have to think about our own behavior and what we're doing, and are we doing things to put our children at risk. Webcams. Before I go off this slide, just a point about webcams. Webcams can be captured. People can look through webcams. So when you are not using your webcam, turn it off. Cyberbullying. Now, there has been a big push in the United States lately about bullying, and certainly cyberbullying is a part of that. I'm from Western Pennsylvania. I'm from Pittsburgh, and last week we had a very significant incident. It was all over the national news where a child in the Franklin Regional High School took a knife to school, slashed 20 of his classmates. What didn't make the national news is that the next day at the Gateway Middle School, which is the school that I went to, there was a hit list. What didn't make the national news is that there were 4 other incidents in the Western PA region all during the course of the week, and every single one was linked back to cyberbullying, where someone had said something about someone online or posted a picture or continued to tweet and harass. And so what we need to be aware of is that this idea, this issue of cyberbullying is continuing to grow, and we have to be very vigilant in talking with our children about the issues that they are facing. It used to be the case, and even with physical bullying, what we would tell the kids, right, if you were being physically bullied, is to get away, right? Don't walk down that street, or be with a group of friends, or get away. How do you get away when it's an online environment? You can't. How do you escape a picture that has been posted and maybe sent to one person and then reposted or retweeted because it quickly gets away from the initiator? And even if the initiator says, well, I'm no longer going to harass you, that picture is still out there. So we have to be very aware of the fact that our children, because they are online, we're looking at the statistics, they're there 8 hours a day, 96% of them. They're using multiple different sites. They face this stress. Now, schools are increasingly becoming aware of and working toward helping to remedy cyberbullying. But I had a conversation with the vice principal of my daughter's school, and one of the things that she said to me is that part of the reason why the school's hands are tied is because if a cyberbullying incident happens at 6 o'clock in the morning, so I sent something out at 6 o'clock in the morning, those are not school hours. And so even though the incident may impact what happens during the school day because school starts an hour later, if the incident has not occurred during school hours, the school's hands are tied. Okay? But schools are increasingly working with local law enforcement to help to figure out exactly what can be done. But in the meantime, you must not just monitor what the kids are doing online, what your kid is doing online, because we often tell our kids, okay, I'm going to watch what you do, and I tell my kid, I have to know your passwords and all of that. But we have to recognize that there may be things happening in these social media spaces that our kids aren't actually doing, but are being impacted by. So if ever there was a time to say, talk to your kid, watch your kid, observe everything that's going on, now is that time. Because it is the only way to begin to get a handle on what they're facing. Identity theft. Don't need to say a whole lot because I think Ellen said it all. But I will say that one of the things that we don't often think about, and this does happen with kids because kids do share their passwords with their friends, regardless of whether we tell them to or not, they do. And even when we talk about making strong passwords, kids don't always do that. Identity theft is not just about using someone's identity or information to get credit cards or social security numbers or that kind of thing. It's also impersonating someone in a social media site. So if I go in the site and I claim to be someone that I'm not, that is identity theft, and that is a form of identity theft that our children often face. Related to bullying sometimes just related to, well, I was just playing a joke or a prank or whatever it is, but that's something that we have to be aware of. Also, you should not just focus on what your child is doing, but recognize that you can expose your child too. Just like with posting YouTube videos, you can accidentally share information about your child when you're on your social media sites, telling information about when your child was born, where your child was born, all of the different pieces of information that you think that you're sharing just, with your friends without any potential harm. But if you have some friends in your network or have somebody in your network that allows that information to get out, you can potentially put your kids at risk. So you want to be as careful about your children's information as you are about your own. What I hope that you have gotten from all of this is that you should be very tired. It takes a tremendous amount of work if you are doing it right and you are vigilant and really raising responsible digital citizens, because it's not just about helping them craft their own behavior, it's also about watching out for things that they don't necessarily know are risks. It's also about watching your own behavior to make sure that you're keeping yourself safe, but also that you're keeping them safe. So here are just a couple of tips, and these tips are on the Stop Think Connect website. Keeping clean machines and connecting with care. You don't want to connect to the public Wi-Fi. You don't want your kids connecting to the public Wi-Fi. You want to protect your information. You want to protect your child's information. You want to be good and informed online citizens so that you can pass that information on to your children so that they understand what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing. But when you do that, you want to keep in mind that you can't expect them to look at privacy, to look at identity, to look at friends the same way that you do. Because they are digital natives. This is a part of who they are. Being in a social media space is optional for you. It is not optional for them. It's no more optional for them than going to school. It is a part of how they are developing themselves and how they are developing their friends. And so to simply say, turn it off, don't participate, I forbid you to have an account, is not going to work. And what it will do is it will make you an adversary instead of a partner in this process. And you can't afford to be in an adversarial role with this process, because the more you know, even if it's stuff you don't want to hear, believe me, I hear things that I really don't want to hear. And I see things that I really don't want to see. My daughter tells me about the kinds of videos that these girls, oh my goodness. The kinds of videos and pictures that these girls and boys, these teenagers are sharing is frightening. But I'd rather hear about it from her so that we can talk about why it's not the right thing to do, than to be in an adversarial role that says you will not, you should not, you do not, you cannot. And just for talking about it, I'm going to cut it off, because frankly, I can't cut it off. She can do things, behind me that I'm like, really? But this is what I do. How is this possible? So you have to get into a different stance with your children. Okay? Set limits. Being in a different stance, not a non-adversarial stance, doesn't mean that it's a free-for-all and that they can do whatever they want. You do need to set limits. You are the parent, but you have to set limits in a way that allows them to be engaged, that allows them to be empowered so that they can bring information to you and you can talk about it and move forward together. For those of you with children under the age of 13, I have just included some sites that do have additional parental controls that are monitored a little bit more carefully, so that the younger kids are not engaging in Facebook and Twitter with the teenagers. Many of these have specific parental policies that you can go in and you can read and set and understand. My kids did a lot with Club Penguin. It was a place where everybody is on a frozen island and they're all penguin avatars, and you can change the color and the hair and play games and buy stuff and have pretty igloos and that kind of thing. But you can also chat with other penguins. And so even in these game spaces, you still have to be aware of the fact that there is communication, often live communication happening with other people that your children don't know. Frankly, gaming sites, and I didn't put that on here, but that's another place that you need to be very careful of, because they're going online and they're playing, what are the shooting games? Call of Duty. Right? Even if you get to the point where you say, you know what, it's fine, as a teenager, it's fine, they can play Call of Duty, I've talked to my child about the fact that this isn't real and all of that, still recognize that they're actually talking to people while they're playing these games. So you have to be monitoring what's being said, how they are engaging with these individuals, and that they understand that the dangers of doing so. And finally, just some additional resources for you, regardless of whether you're looking for information about your child or your children, or frankly, even information about yourself, and how you can gather additional resources for how to understand what your children are doing, statistics on what other kids are doing, because part of the statistics and the value of statistics is also to help you to say, you know what, my child's not crazy. Because we often go through that process of saying, you know what, my child is just over here, my child's an outlier, and I don't understand why you are doing this. And then when you look at the statistics, you see, you know what, most of the kids are doing this. So let's think critically about how we can move this forward. So these are just some websites that will help you with statistics, with resources, with guides and information on how you can talk to your children, understand their behavior, and help to move them forward. And with that, I thank you.
questions? Okay, I know that Little House on the Prairie and the Waltons are looking really good right now, so I want to go home and unplug everything, to be quite honest, to protect the kids. Thank you so much for your time. All right, so you guys are going to love this next speaker as well. Who's heard of NIST 853 Rev 4? Ah, okay. I know, exciting. Another exciting stuff. So we actually have the author, Dr. Ron Ross, with us today, and he's going to be speaking across the board as far as controls, enhancements. If you have some questions, this is interactive. Oh, please don't leave. There he goes. All right. So, Dr. Ross? All right. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Gosh, I love listening to Diana, and you know, my two vulnerabilities are now 29 and 32, so they're. You might have younger vulnerabilities, but well, on Saturday Night Live, there's a skit that you might have heard is Debbie Downer. What I'm going to talk about the next hour is going to make you a little uncomfortable, but it's a discussion that I think we have to have as Americans and citizens and people who care about the future of our country. There's a lot of things in the cyber age now that we have to worry about, as Diane just talked about, that we didn't have to worry about previously. And certainly the last couple of days, when you're dealing with the newest vulnerability, the Heartbleed vulnerability, we're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. But these are things that are at the forefront of every organization today, whether you're in the public or private sector. Cybersecurity is a national concern, both from an economic standpoint and also from a national security standpoint. But before we start, I just want to thank all of you who work at CMS. You do an enormously important work for the American people. It's a very difficult job, and as your deputy CIO was talking about earlier, 100 million people that you're affecting their lives. Medicaid recipients, Medicare. I just had my 63rd birthday, so now I'm getting more in the range of paying more attention to what you do, because I'll be one of your customers pretty soon. But you do enormously important work, and you do it in a world that's very dangerous. And sometimes when I was talking to the staff this morning, the CISO staff, and we expect our CIOs and our CISOs to do virtually an impossible set of tasks today. And a lot of times people don't want to say those words, but it's true, because the kind of information technology infrastructure that we've built today, very complicated infrastructure, we're going to talk about how that complexity can affect your ability to deliver goods and services to your customers and to do it in a more secure manner. Very, very important topics today. I always start these talks with the Constitution, because when I get up every morning, and I have a passion for what I do, I tell young people today, I'm at the tail end of my career, but I tell young people, if you want to have a great career, go get yourself a degree in computer science, computer engineering, and become a cybersecurity geek, because the geeks are actually inheriting the world now. You're going to see in this talk today how sysadmins, and we talked about the insider threat and all the things that can happen with insiders, but my passion comes from the Constitution. I carry a copy with me everywhere I go. And I look at the preamble, and it's got a very powerful set of words, which many of you may have memorized when you were going through school a long time ago. But it says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Very powerful set of words that were crafted over 200 years ago by our founding fathers. And they did it without having laptops and tablets and smartphones. The real question today for all of us is, we're living in the golden age of information technology. You can buy almost any piece of technology today. It's very affordable, very powerful. I carry around a flash drive with 60 gigabytes of storage. How crazy is that? And you can see with the tablets and the smartphones the power of these devices. They are fully functional endpoints. And we're starting to bring these devices into our already complicated infrastructure. So we're living in the golden age of information technology, and the question I'd like you to think about today, this is what I call the honest discussion that we're going to have with our bosses, our senior leaders, is what does it mean to provide for the common defense from the Constitution in the digital age today? And you heard in the last hours in the talk about how much our young people are online and they're interacting with the internet. And so what is going to be the notion of security and privacy that we are going to leave to our children and our grandchildren? We know what the notion of security and privacy is in the paper-based world. But what is it going to be in the digital world that we are actually transforming into today? We're moving into a fully digital age today, and your ability to stay off the grid is almost impossible today. Your digital footprint is out there whether you like it or not, unless you're living in a cave. And even if you're living in a cave, you may have a laptop with wireless connections. So there's no way to really stay out of this digital age today and to interact. So these are threat sources that we deal with today. The most recent one, let me go back here, let me see if I can. The most recent one was the Heartbleed, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but our threat sources come in 4 different flavors. There's the natural disasters, the Hurricane Sandy, Katrina, where you may lose your IT capability because the power goes out or something along those lines, where you have a hurricane. We also have structural failures. We have cyber attacks, which you see a lot of those in the news, and we're reading about more. And those are going to continue to happen, by the way, because our vulnerabilities are going to get more numerous, not less, because we're building an incredibly complicated IT infrastructure. And unless we start to roll back that complexity, we're going to see more and more of this stuff every day. The heartbleeds of the world may just be the tip of the iceberg. And then there's good old-fashioned errors of omission and commission. And we're going to talk a little bit about secure coding techniques and what programmers do to make better software of higher quality. All those things come into play as we look at this new digital age and we look at the threats that are out there facing us every day. So you've probably heard the term advanced persistent threat. This is the most important problem we're going to face going forward. It affects every organization today that depends, and this is almost everybody, for their mission and business success on the successful and dependable information technology. All those systems out there that are fueling the ability for you to carry out and support the citizens and the critical CMS functions, all of that is based in the IT, in the information systems. And in order for you to deliver those goods and services to your customers, that IT must be dependable. And that's where the APT enters the story. The APT uses multiple attack vectors. They will use cyber, physical, and deception. Their objective is to get a foothold in your organization. And they typically want to do one of 2 things to you. Either they want to bring down your capability. Let's say they want to bring down the air traffic control system. You remember back on 9/11, that image is really embedded in my mind when our great colleagues over at the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, air traffic control system, they brought down over 6,000 aircraft to safe locations within about an hour after the towers were hit. So they had command and control of the airspace. If they didn't have that command and control, the pilots fly blind. So a cyber attack on the FAA during a physical attack on 9/11 could have been much greater consequences than we already saw. So we have to worry about loss of capability. And everybody has that unique mission and business capability that you provide. Social Security Administration, cutting checks for seniors, CMS, you have the Medicaid and the Medicare services that you're providing, and all of the resources that go out to the citizens who are taking advantage of those programs, those very important programs. The other side of the coin is exfiltration. That's stealing stuff from you. Now, the Heartbleed is an example of things that went wrong, that shouldn't have gone wrong, possibly. And all of a sudden, information is going out. But that's just one example. Exfiltration has been going on long before Heartbleed. The adversary gets the foothold in your organization, in your system. And again, they like to get as low as they can in what they call the information technology stack. Those of you who are in the IT business know we have the stack that starts with the application, comes into the middleware, down to the operating system, into the firmware, and then down to the hardware, the integrated circuits. And the adversary likes to get in as low as they can, because the lower they get in that stack, including the hardware, they then have more control over the system, to include complete control. So they can put a rootkit in your operating system, or they can change the firmware in your BIOS. They can then take control of the system, and you have no control at that point. And so exfiltration starts to happen. So this is a problem of both economic security and national security interests, because we have lots of great companies in this country, in the private sector, that are competing in the global marketplace. And they're competing on very thin margins in some cases. And when the adversary is stealing this critical information, it could be the next generation automobile designs from General Motors, or it could be a small software startup company in the Silicon Valley working on new innovative technology, or a healthcare company working on medical device technology, innovation. The kinds of things that make America great is innovation. That's what we've always done. And when you start stealing those secrets or that intellectual property before the company can exploit it, then the other side gets the advantage. Now, in the extreme case, when some of this intellectual property has to do with next generation weapon systems, could be a small company in the heart of Nebraska that's working on some very innovative technology that the Department of Defense is interested in, and they may mature that technology over 4 or 5 years till it ends up in a weapon system, giving the American military a competitive advantage on the battlefield. Again, critical to our freedom and our survival. If that technology is compromised by an attack, and that innovation goes over to the adversary, they start to work on countermeasures well before that system is ever fielded. That's when soldiers die on the battlefield, when the adversary can develop those countermeasures before that technology is even deployed. You see, these things have enormous effects on both the national security and how our country is going to look in the next 20 or 30 years as we go forward in this environment of massive IT and a lack of sufficient protection at the core. I call that the weak IT infrastructure. And this is why I say our CISOs and our CIOs are being asked to defend systems today that are largely indefensible in many cases against the high-end cyber attacks, because we haven't invested in the right places and sufficiently in those. But we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So why is this happening today? Well, if you want to have a real eye-opening experience, go out and download the Defense Science Board report from January of 2013. In that report, they did this report for the military because they wanted to know, could our military survive a massive cyber attack? You've heard about the term Cyber Pearl Harbor. A lot of people say that hasn't happened yet. I maintain it's been happening for the last 5 years because exfiltration is going on. When I show you some of the levels of penetration that we're experiencing today, this slide really it says it all. Because when you talk about the types of vulnerabilities, the classes that we deal with, this is what the Defense Science Board talked about. The first class of vulnerability are the known vulnerabilities. That's the ones that you see every Tuesday. What is Tuesday going to be known for when people come back 200 years from now? It's Patch Tuesday. That's where all the vendors announce their latest set of patches because they discovered vulnerabilities either through things they didn't understand when they built the software, or things they didn't worry about when they built the software, or stuff just happens. Known vulnerabilities. So you fix those. You try to fix them. But the problem is those things are being generated at a pace that you will never be able to keep up with because of the complexity. The next class is what we call a zero-day exploit, or an unknown vulnerability. This is when you don't know something that the adversary does know about your infrastructure. And they're going to use that fact that they know something that you don't. And believe me, this is not hard today in a complicated infrastructure. The Heartbleed is maybe an example of that, where that was pretty much an unknown vulnerability till a couple of days ago, last week. Now, it's been around maybe 2 years, but came up on the radar recently. So once you discover the unknown vulnerability, that becomes a known vulnerability, and it moves up to the top, the next level. So now you got those two classes. The third class is when the adversary, through the APT, the Advanced Persistent Threat, gets into your organization and establishes a foothold, and they now have the ability, because they've taken control of your system, They can create new vulnerabilities in your system that you didn't even have before, and they will later come back and exploit those. That is what we worry about today. Now, 2/3 of these vulnerability classes are totally off the radar of the organization. They don't know. They can't see it. That's why what I'm going to talk about today with tacit security is so important. It talks about how do you stop those vulnerabilities in those top 2 tiers. Well, you do it through better systems engineering and better software engineering, better development techniques, building stronger, more trustworthy, and more resilient information systems. I use the analogy of we need to build our systems like NASA builds our space shuttles or this entire space program. I've been following NASA for, I hate to admit it, 50 years now. I used to follow them when I was a kid, going back to the Mercury program and the Gemini and the Apollo. And I remember the first moon landing. I don't know if some of you maybe weren't even born then, but it was July the 20th, 1969. I was a freshman, a plebe at West Point. I'd only been at the academy for 3 weeks. July the 1st, we entered the academy, and they woke us up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they marched all 4,000 cadets into an auditorium that was probably 3 times as big as this room. 2 o'clock in the morning, we watched the first space landing. And I've been fascinated with NASA because they build very complicated systems, and they have very few bad things that happen. We've had the Challenger disaster and the other shuttle that we lost. But over the course of NASA, they've put hundreds, maybe thousands of spacecraft into orbit safely and effectively. And they do it through what we call the integrated project team. They have all the stakeholders around the table. You see this at the launch. And when they poll every stakeholder, and if they get a thumbs up or a thumbs down, the launch sequence is stopped. And they fix the problem. The key is that they're all stakeholders around the table. And security has to stop being a separate office down the hall, and it has to be integrated into the mainstream organizational processes, mission and business processes, enterprise architecture, systems engineering, acquisition, life cycle. You see, we run security as kind of its own little domain out here. And we have our CISOs and the folks who are trying to comply with FISMA. They have to do the right. They come in with the wheelbarrow of controls to the mission business owner, 11 o'clock, 11th hour, and say, hey, you got to do all this stuff or the sky's falling. Bad things are going to happen. Well, by that time, it may be too late because the system has already been through 3/4 of the life cycle. And the kinds of things we're talking about to stop those advanced persistent threats, those unknown vulnerabilities and those ones the adversary creates, that kind of protection has to go into the system early in the life cycle, period. We can't defend them once it's down at the operations and maintenance phase of the life cycle. So this is obvious. You can't stop hurricanes and you can't stop cyber attacks. So what are you going to do when these attacks get through? The security controls in 853 Rev 4 do an excellent job, if they're deployed properly, at stopping the vast majority of cyber attacks. But it can't stop all the attacks. What do you do about the ones it doesn't stop? Well, now you're going to have to look at something that we call systems resiliency. The system has to be able to absorb the attack and not come crashing down with the whole operation behind it. It's like when the malware comes through your network, and it will, because even our best antivirus programs today, though they can't produce the signatures fast enough, there's like a huge production of malware going on out there 24/7. It's an exponential growth curve of malware, and then we've got to have the signatures that are produced and all that. So they're having to go to new innovative techniques besides just signature-based antivirus programs. But about half that malware still comes through your network. What are you going to do when it happens? Is it going to spread throughout the entire network and bring down every component in every system within your organization? Or is it going to be quarantined off through good architecture and engineering so you can deal with that in a more responsible way and it doesn't bring down the entire capability? That's what we're after with resiliency. This is a hard discussion to have because some of the things I'm going to talk about now in the tacit presentation, that part, is going to talk about culture, bureaucracy, institutions. We call them stovepipes sometimes, so the federal government calls them cylinders of excellence. That's the appropriate politically correct term to use. But we talk about sharing a lot, and you can see the ultimate effect of too much sharing is you get everybody knows everything, and you can't keep a secret. So this is going to be a hard discussion to have, and the kinds of things I'm going to talk to you about are not going to happen from, you remember in 839 we have the 3 tiers. We have Tier 1, which is governance. Tier 2 is the mission business process, and Tier 3 is the system level. Most of our work today goes on at Tier 3. We're down there churning at Tier 3. We got the engine out of the car, all the parts are everywhere, and we're thrashing at Tier 3, trying to keep ahead of all these vulnerabilities and all the cyber attacks. Tier 1 and Tier 2 is where the action has to be in order to get healthy long term. That's the hard discussion that has to take place with our senior leaders. Cybersecurity today is actually being dumbed down to the point where we think that we can do certain things and we're just going to be okay. Cyber hygiene is a term that I'm not that fond of, but it's kind of in the lingo now. And cyber hygiene are the things that you do every day to keep your system as secure as it can be, doing certain things like making sure you have a good inventory of all your components, all the boxes, all the software that you're running. Making sure you patch as fast as you can, so you limit the time the adversary has on target to exploit the vulnerability after it's discovered. And then making sure all of your configuration settings under the SCAP program are implemented and are effective. That's good cyber hygiene. That's like getting up every morning and brushing your teeth and taking a shower and getting ready for the day. But if I have to lose 65 or 70 pounds, which I did a year ago, by the way, that is heavy lifting. You don't just lose weight by saying, hey, I'm going to get up and I'm going to lose weight today. It's a hard process, as many of you might know. You got to diet, you got to exercise, you got to do a lot of things. I'm making this analogy because you can do all the cyber hygiene in the world, and you're going to stop a good number of those cyber attacks, but if you can stop only 80% or 90%, what about those 10% that get through and the damage that they're going to do? We worry about things beyond cyber hygiene. We have some tough decisions ahead, and this federal strategy represents kind of two sides of the coin. Most of you are hearing a lot about continuous monitoring now because we're moving from the static 3-year old CNA process to the more ongoing authorization based on continuous monitoring. DHS has their new program out, Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation. That continuous monitoring is an important part of the equation. Understanding the security state of your system, not just every 3 years, but every month, every week, every hour potentially, is very important. But that doesn't substitute, all the continuous monitoring in the world is not going to fix an inherently weak underlying IT infrastructure. That's the build it right part of the problem. And that's the part that nobody really wants to talk about today for a variety of reasons. Build it right says that we care about the trustworthiness, the assurance, the strength of mechanism, and the resilience of the infrastructure. And the analogy I use is that you can check the broken lock on your front door once a day, or you can check it 100 times a day, and that lock is still broken. We have bigger problems. We got termites in the basement. We got to shore up the basement and then fix the lock, and then checking it once, twice, or 100 times a day may make some sense. My point is, when you are making investment decisions with scarce resources, this is more to your bosses probably at the highest levels of CMS, but making important investment decisions, you're going to have to make some tough decisions. Am I going to spend all my money on continuous monitoring or my annual assessments, or am I going to take some of that money and invest it in stronger, more penetration-resistant components and systems? In about 2 weeks, we're going to release special publication 800-160, brand new special pub. It's called Systems Security Engineering. It's about how do you take a systems engineering process and make sure that security is infused in every stage of that process, from the stakeholder requirements at this end all the way down to the operations and maintenance and sustainment at the other end. Security plays a role in every one of those processes, and this publication is going to help you work with your contractors to ensure that those security safeguards and countermeasures and activities are built into the process. That's something we haven't done very effectively up to this point. That's why your CISOs and your CIOs have to defend systems that may not be defensible against some of the high-end adversaries. We've got to give them the tools to work with, and we've got to be better customers. I often say that if we were as tolerant with errors and bugs in our refrigerators and our automobiles as we are in our software, those companies would have been out of business a long time ago. And you can't always rely on the customer to do the right thing. How many of you know whether your access control mechanisms that come out of 853 or your INA mechanisms are effectively implemented within your operating system? You don't have access to the source code, so how would you know? You see, we have to have greater visibility into the critical components that we're using to build these systems in order to understand how much our risk is. What's our risk tolerance and how much risk do we actually have? These are very important points. So this is your toolbox that we built over the last, actually 10 years. But in the last 5 years, these 5 publications, we call this the Unified Framework. It includes your security controls, the 839 Enterprise-Wide Risk Management, the Risk Assessment Guideline, the Evaluation, the Assessment Guideline. All of these are, and then the RMF, the Risk Management Framework. All of these publications are part of the Unified Framework now, which have been adopted by the entire federal government. The DoD made an announcement 2 weeks ago. They've redone all their policies to follow these publications. So is the intelligence community. They built and revised these publications with us. With the appropriate security clearances, we have access to the good threat data. So we can see who are these adversaries? What is their capability? Do they have bad intentions? Who are they targeting? Are these attacks successful? You see, when you have access to that kind of data, we can build in 853 Rev 4 the best security and privacy controls anywhere in the world. I don't care what catalog you go to, there is no catalog that has the breadth and depth of 853 Rev 4. Now, you don't have to use all those controls. That's something that people always talk about. There's 861 in there. You pick the ones that you need to protect the systems here and the mission and business operations at CMS. The mission and business owner has great flexibility in that regard. And that's something you always should cherish and use aggressively. That ability to design your security plans as you see fit is a very important capability. And now that we've moved into continuous monitoring, you have the ability to define how often you're going to be assessing your controls and monitoring those controls. And you have the ability to define how much work you're going to do in that process. And you have now more control over the amount of resources that you're expending in each of these areas. You can make better investment decisions. Well, we built the toolbox, but unfortunately, the best toolbox in the world doesn't make a master craftsman. You know, I can have great tools, but I'm not going to be producing world-class furniture unless I, have some instruction and a little experience and some expertise and know-how. TACIT is an acronym that I came up with over the Christmas holidays. I actually come back from a trip to Korea, made a speech over there, and I was thinking about if I had 5 or 10 minutes with the big boss, maybe the director of CMS, or maybe the director of HHS, or maybe that CEO from one of our Fortune 500 companies, what things would I tell them in 5 or 10 minutes to really raise their awareness to the point where they were not just hearing the stuff in this ear and going out the other ear? You can nod the head like this and say, hey, there's a lot of cyber problems out there. Really, the proof in the pudding is what do you do about it? What actions come out of that understanding? Understanding the modern threat space is the first part of the TACIT, and I'll go through that very quickly just to give you a sense of what that kind of covers. But this conversation is important because it helps organizations understand how to use the tools effectively to get better solutions. We can't continue to do cybersecurity just because we have FISMA compliance to worry about. That's interesting to us, but the adversaries don't care much about that at all. They care about how strong your systems are. And that's all they care about. They want to get in, you've got valuable stuff, they could care less about your FISMA scores. I use the analogy of bridge builders. When I go down into DC, I drive over the new Wilson Bridge. I have an expectation that when I start out on the Maryland side, by the time I get to the Virginia side, I'm still on the bridge. I'm not going to be in the water. And the reason I have that confidence is because I know that the people who built that bridge, they started with physics. And all bridge builders go through a lot of physics classes. And they talk about things like equilibrium, static and dynamic loads, vibrations, resonance. And then they use those physics, the concepts, to do good engineering. And they build a very good bridge that's going to stand up to stresses and loads. That's why I have confidence when I drive over the bridge. Now, have we seen bridges that have collapsed? Yes. I've got some friends that work at the University of Minnesota. They had a bird's eye view of that Minnesota bridge that collapsed about 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago. But it happens rarely. Your expectation is pretty good. Same thing when you get in an airplane. I travel a lot. I don't worry much about traveling in airplanes because I know they're well engineered, they're safe, and they do a lot of inspections. And so I have confidence and assurance when I travel. Now, when I'm on the Beltway in D.C., my confidence is a little bit less, you know. But there again, the automobile industry, if you go back to when you were a kid, I mean, I'm talking about some of you graybeards out there that were around when seatbelts were not even required in the 50s. I wasn't driving in the 50s, but I was waiting to drive anxiously. Seatbelts were an option. They later on, they became mandatory. And I remember buying one of my first cars where the guy says, well, do you want power steering? Do you want the CD player? It was an 8-track back then, I think. Do you want an airbag? It was optional. And if you said yes, it cost you $500. But today, what do we get? There's no option. You see, that safety equipment is being built in to those automobiles, and the customer doesn't have to worry about it. They're reinforcing the side doors now with steel reinforced beams. Even that little smart car, I thought that was very vulnerable. Now they got this big 10,000-pound weight they're dropping on it and showing how it's reinforced. It's like a little space capsule. You see, this is good engineering, and it's strengthening the underlying mechanism. I use the NASCAR. I'm a big NASCAR fan. I know that a lot of you don't like NASCAR, but I love watching those cars. They have a huge threat in NASCAR. The threat is driving a high-performance race car around a track at 200 miles an hour with cement barriers with 3 inches from the car. You talk about a hair-raising experience. Now, about a decade ago, Dale Earnhardt Sr. was killed in an accident at Daytona. Hit the wall, 200 miles an hour, broke his neck, killed him instantly. NASCAR didn't sit around wringing their hands about, oh my gosh, the threat is out there. The threat is actually part of their business model, because if those cars are driving around that track at 30 miles an hour, they're not going to put people in the seats. So they built the threat into their business model, and what they invented was something called the Hans device, head and neck safety. It's a harness that reinforces the driver, put it around his neck, and then when the car impacts, the neck is not snapped back at a high rate of speed. You see, that's strength of mechanism, and since that, every driver wears that now, and no driver dies. And there have been some horrific crashes in NASCAR since that device was used, but no drivers are dying from broken necks. That's my analogy about building this stuff into systems. So contrast that with how we build our software today. Are we building all these secure mechanisms and are we using our best practices to build the best software we can build? The answer is probably no. Some companies are, but a lot aren't. And those same commercial products that are out there, then you have to use those products and build your systems. So this is a problem that's not going to be solved by CMS and your ISSOs and your CISO alone. You're on the operational side, but it's going to be solved by a partnership between public and private sector. Everybody has to pull their part, building more secure component products, taking those products and using them and putting them through a systems and secure engineering process that makes sure that those products are assembled in a more secure manner that can give you greater confidence that your CMS applications and systems are not going to be subject to these ongoing cyber attacks, or at least reduce the probability down to within your risk tolerance. Trustworthiness, assurance, penetration resistance, and resilience, those are terms that we should be very familiar with today, but the sad truth is that we're not. These terms are not. We've lost actually a whole generation who understand what trustworthy systems are and what assurance really is. We've got to get that back into our lexicon, because if we don't, we're going to continue to see weak information technology infrastructures, and the cyber attacks will continue, and the exfiltration, it's like the lobster in the pot. You know, the lobster starts out, the water's nice and cold, splashing around, then the heat goes up and up and up, and pretty soon you know the end of the story. You see, we don't see a lot of these attacks, and unless we can architect and engineer for better solutions, it's going to be a long road ahead. These are the areas that we are looking at moving forward from NIST. Software assurance, I talked about the 800-160, that's the engineering guideline, and of course supply chain risk management. If you deal with contractors, and I know you deal with a lot of contractors here at CMS, look at special publication 800-161. That's the one that's right after the 160, supply chain risk. It'll give you some tips on how to deal with the supply chain, which we all have to do today. Rev 4, 853, did a lot to strengthen the specification language. If you go into the SA family, that's the language that contractors are going to pay attention to. So we don't tell them what kind of process to use, but we want them, and you can do this by putting these controls in your specification language. So when you go out to procure a new system, you can require the contractor to follow best practices with regard to security design, system development, having a good configuration management system, doing appropriate testing and evaluation of that. All of these things can be specified in the contract, and then they can provide evidence to you that they have actually met that specification. In essence, giving you a higher quality product. And what that means at the end of the day, fewer weaknesses and deficiencies or errors in the software means that you're going to have fewer vulnerabilities, because a certain percentage of those errors in the code can be exploited by adversaries, threat agents. Threats exploit the vulnerabilities to cause the mission impact, and then there's usually a likelihood associated with that activity. Some of the controls in 53, these are all out of the SA family. These are just some areas that we really strengthened. Again, to give you, to empower you to feel that you can actually go out to contractors and be good consumers, demanding consumers. Because if you look at the refrigerator and the automobile example, think of your software and your systems in the same type of situation. In fact, your systems are doing more critical things sometimes. And in fact, computers can't be decoupled from anything in society today. They're in every one of our automobiles. All the new automobiles have 20 or 30 computers. Now, they're not just controlling your entertainment system. They may be controlling your braking system or some of the other safety critical systems. And anything that has a computer and has wireless access and is connected to a network in some way, that is the attack vector that the adversaries can use now. This is why I call this a hard discussion, because sometimes we don't want to face the facts as they are. It's like in the military. I was in the Army for 20 years, and there's an old saying, you go to war with the Army that you have, not the Army that you want. But that doesn't mean that you're not planning for the future, what the Army is going to look like, or the Air Force, a decade from now. So whatever is at CMS today, you're defending. And your CISO and all the folks who are working on the front lines are doing a great job trying to, hold the line. But what is it going to look like in the future for CMS as you look at things like cloud computing? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But those are the things that can really, really make a difference long term. So now TACIT. It's an acronym, and it stands for Threat, Assets, Complexity, Integration, and Trustworthiness. Now, each of these, this is a 5-minute conversation with the CEO. TACIT also, it just turns out the acronym was a nice acronym, because if you look at the dictionary definition, it's having security be expressed or understood without being directly stated. That's what I talked about before. Today, most of our security organizations are separate offices, and they run around serving the different organizations, the customers, but they're not integrated into the organizational mainstream processes. I use the analogy of when the military deployed to Iraq in 2003, they embedded reporters within the military. They put reporters out there on the front lines so they can tell the story. They get the ground truth of what's going on. And so when you embed your security professionals in the system development lifecycle process with those folks, or the people doing your enterprise architecture, or the people who are going out and doing your RFPs for the acquisition, when you do all that, you get that expertise embedded in the place where it can make a difference. How many acquisitions have you seen that go out, have all of those system requirements listed end to end, and then the very last requirement with security says the system must be FISMA compliant? And that's all you get. Not that the acquisition folks are dumb. They want to do the right thing. They know FISMA is a law, and they know they got to have it, whatever that might be. But that tells the contractor nothing. What they need to have is like FedRAMP did. FedRAMP got together and said, what kind of controls do we want for low-impact cloud systems and moderate? And they got together with a big working group and they settled on a set of controls, and that became part of the FedRAMP specification. So if a cloud provider wants to do good security and deal with the federal government, they've got to put those controls in. They have to be independently assessed by the 3PAO organization. That's how you as a customer can get confidence in the cloud provider. Because of that, it's all the risk management framework applied in an external service provider context. The RMF works whether you're doing it internally. It also works when you're doing it with external providers as well. So, tacit. Understand the modern threat space. This is where you have to go out, either get a classified briefing if you have a security clearance. One of your people probably has that, I'm sure. Or go to open source. The Verizon report, Symantec, Mandiant, there's lots of open source stuff out there. But the important point is you have to personalize this to the organization, not just running around saying, hey, there's a Heartbleed vulnerability out there. What does Heartbleed mean to CMS? Or what does that latest threat mean to the vulnerabilities you have in your CMS systems today that you know about? That's when you go to the senior leadership and say, here's the threat. These are our vulnerabilities, and if this threat impacts this vulnerability, here's the mission impact. This system is going to go down, and you're not going to be able to cut checks for the seniors or some other type of impact. Personalizing that threat, that's the only way that the mission business owners really get it, because they're the risk takers. They have to understand what it means to bleed in this world. And if they can't see it, that's our job as professionals, security professionals, to bring the information to them so they can make credible risk-based decisions. They can't do that wearing blinders today, and a lot of times we're not giving them all the data they need. Assets. FIPS 199 breaks things down into the high, moderate, and low impact categories. Why? Because all assets can't be critical. You don't have enough money to protect everything. But the high-end assets, things that are really critical, those need to be separated and protected at a much higher degree today with regard to the high-end threat. And just understanding what those critical assets are can be a job sometimes. Now, FEMA does their list of the critical continuity of government and all those critical applications and things that we have to deal with at the federal level, but every organization has to go through this drill themselves. That's what FIPS 199 was all about, looking at your data. High impact versus low impact, and what does it mean? Complexity, we'll talk a little bit about that, but the infrastructure is way too complicated. Even our best and brightest security professionals cannot understand how to defend the complicated systems and networks that we have built. And why is that? Because the technology is cheap and it's powerful. And when you have a combination of those two things, cheap and very affordable, people buy a lot of it. And you can see this every day in your personal lives. You're buying the new smartphone or the tablet or the new laptop. And that's replicating all across the federal government with systems and components. I have a friend of mine who works at NASA. I won't tell you which center, but he had a little bit of difficulty. You know, they go out and they do network scans, and I am sure you've done the same thing. You go out and do a network scan, you find loose boxes you didn't know you had out there on the network. Sound familiar? Sometimes you find whole networks you didn't know you have. That's even more depressing. Well, what he decided to do at this NASA center is shut down everything one morning, everything. And he was going to wait for see who called. And he got some angry phone calls right away. But then at the end of the day, there was a whole bunch of systems that nobody ever called about. And nobody had management over. Those are prime targets for adversaries. What you are not managing, the adversary is going to attack because it's undefended in essence. So complexity, we have to manage it. Cloud computing is a good way to do it. You can go to the public cloud, private cloud, hybrid, community. Lots of options there, but the important point about cloud is that you can save 5 to 40% on your IT assets, not just the initial investment, but most of your costs in IT come with the tail after that system is in place and has to be supported. When you do cloud, whether it's public or private, you have to make that decision. You are going to have more efficient services for your customers. That's the definition of cloud, on-demand services. You don't have to own everything anymore. Provisioning as you need it. More effective, more efficient services, lower cost because you have less to own, and you will get an opportunity to do much better cybersecurity. Why? Because it's less complicated. So that's one of the ways you can reduce and manage complexity. Enterprise architecture is another way to do it. When you do EA, 3 key words: consolidation, optimization, standardization. What that means is enterprise architecture makes it a leaner and meaner infrastructure. You reduce. It's like I use the example when you get your federal paycheck. I don't know who cuts your checks, but I'm in the Department of Commerce at NIST, and agriculture cuts our paychecks. You see, they decided that every agency didn't have to cut paychecks. That's a waste of time and energy. So they find a more efficient way to do it. And now every federal agency is not running a system that cuts paychecks. Well, just think how much complexity that saves right there. And think about all the things that we do because the infrastructure just kind of grew. It's like my wife's folks are from Indiana, Old Town, Knightstown, and a lot of the homes were built at the turn of the last century. And it starts out a little house, and then you build a little porch, and you build an upstairs, and you build the back porch, and things just kind of spread. There's no architecture. You're just kind of building it out. That's how we're building our architectures today. We're just kind of buying stuff and hooking it up. And that is a recipe for disaster against these high-end threats. They will absolutely bring that back to you in droves. Let me just go through. The modern threat space, that's the first task here, understanding what that threat looks like, personalizing it. If you can get the classified briefing, that's always better because you get the good stuff and you can see some of the things that are not generally seen by folks who don't have clearances. Oh, insider threat, also a big deal now, right? We talked about, we have 2 huge examples. We have Bradley Manning, that's the WikiLeaks example. That happened over in the European theater. That was a soldier who he was a bad actor. He was already on the radar. They took away his weapon because he was a bad actor, but guess what? They didn't take away his privileges till it was too late. And then we have the Snowden episode. And without getting into, the right or wrong, I can tell you that a system administrator today has literally, they sit on top of a treasure trove of information. Even in the classified community, where in the paper world you had to have a security clearance, and what was the other thing? You had to have a need to know. So when I worked at the NSA a long time ago, I had a top secret SCI clearance. And that was the highest clearance you could have. But I couldn't get access, even with that clearance, to 99.999% of the data because I didn't have a need to know. Think about your sysadmins, like Snowden. He's sitting on top of this treasure trove of data, and just because he's a sysadmin, he gets access to all that stuff that he may not have a need to know. Now, we have security controls, believe it or not, that may not have stopped that totally, but it could make it more difficult. We have a set of controls called dual authorization. It's kind of like when those 2 Air Force captains are sitting in that silo, that missile in Colorado, and when the National Command Authority says to launch that missile, both captains have to stick a key in and turn the key for it to happen. Not because they're not good people sitting there, it's just that you have that trust has to be divided because if one of them, is there by themselves and they go bad, you're going to see the effects. You see, these are problems we didn't have in the paper world, but now we have them. That's why I say the cyber geeks have inherited the planet. Because they're sitting in these positions with all this power and access that many of them shouldn't have or don't need to have. That's, again, something to think about as you architect here within CMS. We talked about critical assets. I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time on that. I think the point is get the critical assets into their own domain so you can do a better job at putting stronger things in there that will help you do the protection. We talked about reducing complexity, enterprise architecture, cloud computing. Integration. I talked about this one a little bit, but look around the organization and see who is struggling with cybersecurity problems that are causing you to have systems that are not defensible against the high-end adversaries. Do your enterprise architects understand enough about security? And believe me, all these folks speak different languages. Enterprise architects have their own language, systems engineers have their own language, acquisition folks have their own language, and then we have our own language in cybersecurity. They need to talk to each other and have a dialogue. So ask yourself, do the enterprise architects understand enough about security as they're building the EA? Is that security architecture being integrated into that enterprise architecture? When the acquisition folks are going out for an RFP or a contract, do they have the requirements specified in enough detail that the contractor can understand exactly what you need to protect your systems and your missions, your protection needs, in essence? Same thing with system development lifecycle. You know, see, for a long time, certification accreditation, that CNA process, ran as a separate activity, and it wasn't tightly integrated into the mission and business process space. That is where we want to move to get better outcomes. Talked about trustworthiness, separation of your critical assets into enclaves, greater strength of mechanism. And all of these things are going to be discussed in 800-160, but you can see there are terms and things, we've known about these things for 2 or 3 decades now. Trust technology, modular design, layered defenses, component isolation. You see, these are terms that people who do systems security engineering have known about for a long time. They're just not in the game. They're not at the NASA table with all the stakeholders, so when that mission is being developed, we've got the appropriate protections built in from the start. That's not saying things aren't going to happen bad at the other end, but I'll guarantee you if we're not putting stuff in at the front end, there's a whole lot more stuff at the back end that's going to happen that we're not going to like, as opposed to being involved early. So, when you want to have the 5-minute conversation, it's about understanding the modern threat space, making sure you understand what assets are critical, which ones are not, trying to reduce and manage the growing complexity within your IT infrastructure, getting the cybersecurity and privacy people into the right places within the organization. That's the hard one because you're dealing with culture, stovepipes, bureaucracy. And I've said this before, sometimes I think our greatest adversary might be those 3 things because they're hard to change. And finally, let's pay more attention to trustworthiness, things that actually make more penetration resistant and more resilient systems. So we have a couple more minutes. These slides, if they're not going to be available, I'll make them available to you. You can send me an email and I'll give you copies of them. But these are the way we do our strategies today. You're down at the boundary defense today trying to keep the bad guys out, but we talked about building more resilient systems. That's more agile defense. You have to be able to absorb a cyber attack today and not bring the organization to its knees. And the only way that happens is through better architecture and engineering. When that malware comes through the pipe, it gets quarantined. It can't spread through every component and bring down the systems and all the missions that are being supported by that system. This is an important graphic because, as I said earlier, most of our work today, we're at Tier 3. We're churning at Tier 3. We're chasing every vulnerability that comes down the pike every Tuesday. But in order to get healthy, we're going to have to engage those top 2 tiers. That's governance. That's where the senior leaders live and breathe and define your critical missions. And then those critical missions get articulated at Tier 2 through mission business processes, which then moves out through the enterprise architecture, which is where the first security stuff starts to make its place in the architecture. And that Tier 2 then provides a roadmap, so when you go out to buy a new system or procure a new system, you have a roadmap now about how those components ought to look, what kinds of protections ought to be there, where those protections ought to be placed to get the maximum advantage in helping you protect your critical assets when you use the systems down at Tier 3. This is the RMF. It's still as good as it was 10 years ago. It's a good way to manage your decision-making process on how many controls do I need, what controls do I need, where do they go, are they effective, and again, does the authorizing official have enough information to make a credible risk-based decision? You see, it's not good enough anymore for an authorizing official just to sign off on the document. We've got to give them enough information so they really do understand what the risk is before they sign the document. So it's understanding the risk and then accepting it. Or if the risk is not within your risk tolerance, go back and do some stuff, fix some things, reduce that risk till it's within your risk tolerance. How many of you have actually looked at the risk tolerance for every one of your mission and business lines? Most people think the risk tolerance is one for the entire organization. CMS is a large organization, complicated. You're going to have many risk tolerances based upon the mission and business line and the criticality or the importance of that mission and business line. and that will get articulated down through the systems that are supporting those missions in business lines. So you may have risk tolerance that's very conservative in one area because, let's say you're moving a lot of money through a system, through the Medicaid or Medicare system, and that's a high-impact system. Maybe your risk tolerance is very low. You're very conservative. On the other hand, there may be some low-impact systems that are just not that important, and your risk tolerance is, much greater, and you can afford to take a lot more risks because the impact has a ceiling of low impact. It can't do much damage, even if everything goes wrong. That's the risk tolerance has to be really defined in a much more granular fashion. And then we go to a continuous monitoring where you have an ongoing understanding of the risk over time. That's what ongoing authorization is all about. Your AOs aren't going to have the luxury anymore of saying, hey, I'm going to sign this, then 3 years later I'll come back. The ongoing authorization says you're going to be given information on an ongoing basis, and you're going to use that to increase your understanding of the security state of your system, and then is that system secure enough to continue in operation and not put your core missions and business operations in jeopardy. And that's going to be an ongoing. Now, how often you do that with your AOs, that's going to be your call. You have a lot of flexibility in that regard. Well, I'm going to go through these quickly. I've already mentioned these publications. We talked about all these things. Situational awareness is really the critical part. Final thoughts. Again, I go back as far as President Kennedy is the first president I remember, 1960. He was elected in 1960 and took office in 61. And I remember this speech. I was actually only 10 years old when he made this speech, but it sticks in my mind for some reason. He said, and this has the connection to NASA, it has the connection to what it means to be American and to do the kind of innovations and exceptional things that we have done over the centuries. He said, we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. You see, he said that in 1961 because we were in a space race at that time. And if you think back, and then fast forward to the story I told you about when I was a plebe in July the 20th in 1969, that's 8 years later. From ground zero to putting a man on the moon and getting him back to Earth safely. That was with 1950s computing technology. How do we do that? Good architecture and good engineering, and a lot of smart people. You see, we didn't have all the stuff that we have today, this great computing technology, but yet we were able to do some amazing things. Now, these cyber problems today, this is the great challenge of the 21st century. I talked about what kind of world are we going to leave to our children and our grandchildren. What is the definition of security and privacy going to be? It's not going to be the same thing you and I remember because these systems are so porous that we can't have security or privacy. These are hard problems. They're going to take some serious discussions with mission business owners. There may be some china that gets broken in the china cabinet along the way. But at the end of the day, the question we have to ask all of ourselves, are we prepared to do the heavy lifting? Or are we just going to kind of bury our head in the sand and worry about when is the next iPhone coming out or the next tablet coming out? You see, our kids are engaged, as the last speaker talked about. They're out there doing social media and having a good time with all this technology. But under the surface, where those vulnerabilities that you can't see, the adversary is stealing us blind, and they're putting our national security in jeopardy. And if you want to maintain a status as a superpower, that can't happen for very long. That's why this problem on critical assets is something we have to look at not a year from now or 2 years from now. Our ability to solve these problems will depend on us being proactive and not, as we currently are, in pretty much of a reactive state. This is the balance between doing good cyber hygiene, which is necessary, that's the patching and the counting and the configuring, and the investing in stronger infrastructure. That's the conversation that you want to have in the C-suite, if you're not having it already. The clock literally is ticking on this problem, and if you have access to classified threat data and you can see some of the devastation that's going on, not just in the public sector, but the private sector, the time to act is now. This comes from a famous movie. I forgot which movie it was. I don't think it was Clint Eastwood, but failure really is not an option when the future of our country is at stake, both economically and from a national security standpoint. Thank you for your attention this morning. You've been very patient, and I hope you have a great day. And call us up. You're our customers. We're here to serve you. If you have any kind of questions or you want to use the PowerPoints for your briefings or whatever you need, call upon us. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. Are there any questions for Dr. Ross? Okay. All right, thank you. Before we take a quick break, I wanted to introduce our EISG team, so you could put a name to a face. All of our information are in your EISG, your gold envelope that was sitting in your chair. But basically, our CISO is Teresa Fryer, who unfortunately couldn't make it here today. I am the Deputy CISO. I'm James Morantan, and we have two divisions within our organization. The first one is the policy side, which is led by Jackie Toomey. And
Clapping moment.
All right.
You have to tell a crowd sometimes, right?
And also, I'm going to call out everyone's names, so if you could just raise your hand or stand up when I call your name, please do so. For the training and awareness team, it's led by Kim Henby, Chris Gayhead, and Bill Pollock. Our ATO team, Kurt Werner and Jason King. Our SCA team is led by Jessica Hoffman. Our policy, thank you. Our policy team is led by Clarence Mayfield. Audits, Deb Ash-Borfosh. And our POAM team is handled by James Mensa, Tony O, and Desmond Young. On our Division of Information Security Operations side, our division director is David Alexander. He's here. Pen testing is led by Jack Shatoff in the back. Incident handling is led by Mark Elke. Continuous monitoring, Rob Ringus. And security engineering by David Baer. Okay, vendors are in the lobby. We will reconvene at the multi-purpose room at 11:15. So if you're on the phone, please join back up at 11:15. And we will have a security breach demonstration over there. All right, thank you.